Can you talk about the climate strike that youth are leading on Friday? Tomorrow we'll have a roundtable of youth discussing this, walking out of school. It's something you know well from anti-apartheid days in South Africa.
Well, yeah. I mean, I walked out of school when I was 15. It's a little bit of deja vu, but let me just say these kids are much more smarter, much more strategic, much more
you got
sort of
thrown
networked.
Out.
Yeah, I, together with thousands, were expelled from school for that reason.
And you were 15 years old.
Yeah, I was 15. But
and so you've asked now schools around the world to do the opposite.
Yeah, and you know, I would argue that my act, together with my fellow young people in South Africa at that time, was actually an educative act. We learned actually from being part of trying to shape the history of our country. These young people are shaping the history of the world. Democracy Now!, as you know, has been covering climate activism for a long time intensively. I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is the most powerful, energizing moment in our struggle on climate catastrophe. And I think that while on the one hand we're facing a situation where we are so close to the cliff because we're running out of time, on the other hand, I think the young kids have actually shown courage. And I wrote to principals and teachers and so on, just saying, you know, not to punish kids for doing what their parents should be doing and what political and business leaders should be doing. The reality is the kids are behaving like adults, and some of our politicians, including the guy that sits in the White House, are behaving like spoiled brats.
And by the way, the kids are saying that all people should walk out and should not just be children, work out of their workplaces, come from home to join in the streets.
Yes, and I have to tell you, you've been using a figure of 1 million people or more than 1 million. I am cautiously optimistic that this is going to be the largest climate protest and potentially one of the largest protests ever to happen in the world. We, yesterday, in terms of the website, almost the double number of events were registered within 48 hours. There is a momentum that is picking up, and I hope that parents in particular will honor their children. Those parents that are able to participate and join wherever they are in the world, we encourage them to do that, because what is at stake here is not saving the planet. It's actually securing our children and their children's future, and therefore it's right that children are in the front line when their politicians are not willing to protect their futures.
Could you talk about what's happening to climate activists around the world?
Well, actually, this is exactly the conversation we had with the UN Secretary General yesterday, where we pointed out to him that according to Global Witness, last year, for example, every week, 3 environmental activists on average were murdered, right? Most of them every week. By the way, the statistic in previous years, for the last several years, was 2 per week. It spiked since the Bolsonaro election, for example. And in Brazil. So what we see, it's global, that's a global average, but there's a disproportionate number of people being killed in the Amazonian area and in Latin America. But it's important that we recognize that the repression is not only about murder, but the attacks in terms of online attacks. In terms of online attacks, as a report by Amnesty International last year showed, if you take Twitter, for example, there's a disproportional level of abuse against women and a disproportional level of abuse against women of color. And now we are seeing that young people are particularly also in the front line of this attacks by usually politicians, the handful that are still denying the climate science.